Okay, with that, we come to the final presentation and talk for the day, and one that I'm particularly proud also that we made happen after a long time. So our next speaker, and I'm going to have a conversation with her also after that, is somebody that I know now, I think, for 10 years. So we have been like for ancient times in the same industry. So I think I met Deanne Eisnor originally when she started Playful, like one of the key companies in the early geo times when she was figuring out like how people bookmark places, share places, and put that together. And I think a lot of the things that Deanne has built back then are now like commonplace in like any mapping app of this world that you have. So she's been like a true innovator and ahead of the time, even back then when she had her own startup. And then she has set up the US office for Waze, grown and scaled that. She's now in charge of the community at Waze. So she has been part of an amazing success story. So please welcome Deanne Eisnor on stage. And that's going to be like a true highlight for me to hear that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Deanne.
Thank you. That was very kind. And it just shows that we're both getting old. Okay. That said, I know this is the wrap-up talk for you guys, so I'll try to keep it as engaging as possible. But Philip also told me that we have a little extra time for Q&A on the stage, so make sure that you come up with questions if you are so inspired. Okay, I am going to start with just sharing a few stories about scaling Waze. I started the US office 9 years ago, and I'm primarily responsible for all of our growth in the various stages: analytics, business development, distribution, whatever we needed on the growth side. So a super simple framework for growth looks something like this. When you're just starting out, it's all about getting new users, right? You're counting the people that are coming in. And then after about 12 seconds, you realize that's not good enough. We need to figure out how often they're using you, with what level of engagement, a lot of the metrics that Ashley was talking about. And then at a certain point, that's not good enough. You need to figure out what is the retention. How are you increasing and growing your retention? After that, things get kind of crazy and fragmented, and you have to start growing lots of things. Your features, different market segments, different kinds of customers, different regions, different countries. So that's the simple version. So if we look at stage one, growing new users, this is a very happy time, right? You don't have bugs. Everyone likes your vision. Everyone's trying out your product because of a promise you're making. They don't actually know yet that it doesn't work. So these are the good days. Charm is enough. Vision is enough. Like I said, that's 12 seconds. And then you get into the hardest part, which is never ending. And this is the iteration on the product market fit. And I really wish someone had told me 10 years ago not to have very high expectations that we would nail it on the first time, because it took years, and it's still ongoing. This is Waze today. Some of you may know it, navigation, traffic application, and it's smooth and gives you all kinds of great information, and we integrate with Spotify. But when I started, this is what it looked like. It was a blank map with no data and no users. So we couldn't exactly come out and say, we are the coolest traffic and navigation application. We couldn't say that. We had to be true to what we really had at the time, which was a desire to get people driving around, watching themselves create a road on a map, then going to a website, giving that road a name. And this is actually how we started. And the funny thing is that even at this phase, we were featured on the App Store. Because it was weird, because it was honest, because no one had ever driven around watching themselves make a line before. So even if you know your end game, it doesn't mean that your product is going to be able to pull it off at the beginning. But we could tell that even if it was a small group of users, that they were more engaged and that we were onto something. Then it looked like this: how to get people to start using a service you know is not very good. So we had our base layer map, and we gave people points for driving around and validating our roads. And if we didn't have information on one street, we put a cupcake or a present, and they got 6 virtual points, and that changed behavior. They actually did it. That was a surprise. I mean, we hoped it would work, but it actually did. Other surprises along the way, it's really about what opportunities you can seize. And it was a time in LA when there was horrible construction. 350,000 vehicles were going to be displaced. And a TV station came to us and said, can we put this on TV? Because crowdsourcing is the only way that we're going to be able to understand what's happening on the roads. So we thought, okay, that's cool. We went into the studio. We figured out that we could actually put our iPad to the green screen. Me and the CEO were in the makeup chair at 4 a.m. actually giving traffic instructions. So you try a lot of weird stuff to take advantage of these opportunities. That's what you got to do. But then other people wanted to use this app for their TV, for their broadcasters. And we launched in Argentina. And at that time, we were only, I want to say, like number 50 on the App Store. After the TV partnership, we were number 1 across the board on the App Store. So these kinds of things, you just never know. When you're trying out the opportunities, what's going to work. You figure out which ones do, and then you keep going. Now we have a whole product just for broadcasters. So that's the product market fit, and that's stage 2 through X. But the market stage is not a nice, neat circle like that iteration. The market is going to throw things at you can't even imagine. We look at trends, right? We say, well, we think that navigation is going to look like this. We think our cities are going to have this happen. We think this technology is going to work. And then a competitor launches something that you can't even predict, you had no control over, like for us, Apple Maps deciding they were going to launch. We had a term sheet on the table. It was pulled. People thought, you're never going to be able to compete with Apple. Okay. Do you remember when Apple Maps launched? So we had no control. It's something the market threw at us. It was our number 1 day in new registrations. So the fact that we were able to stay focused on what we had to do, no matter what the market was throwing at us, was important. But also at around that time, because things were getting so complex, we were growing. We had to take our growth with much, much, much more rigor and strategy. So we had to build an experimentation framework. We had to understand how to A/B test different features in different markets, different copy in different markets, different ways of communicating with our users. We had to build an entire user communications platform so that we would understand if we sent you a push notification on this and you didn't open it, let's not do it again next time. And it was a really complicated thing. We learned a lot. And this is where our learning really kicked in. And one of the things that we noticed was velocity. These are 3 different countries that we thought we were doing pretty well in. But then if you look at those third boxes, that's the velocity. So our growth was really stagnating in some countries and really going fast in others. So that little realization told us that we had to start thinking about things through a more local lens. And we started simple. This is, you know, the App Store icons that you get to put on. You know, we just had that Waze guy for a long time. We did a test, which is just to add flags. Just the local flags, so simple. It's just, humans are so funny. Anyway, we did that, and this was the results. The increase in App Store optimization just by adding flags. So I thought, okay, people need to feel like there's something locally resonating. And then we started looking at what features needed to be localized for different kinds of driving. So in Los Angeles, it was about left-hand turns. In Sao Paulo, it was about being able to do license plate routing because there's restrictions saying that you can't drive on certain times of day, certain days of the week, depending on your license plate number. In Rio, we had to be serious about crime. How could we start bringing in crime data in a way that didn't hurt the local communities? We do this thing called the expected outcomes. We imagine when we launch something what we think will happen. We thought that in the city of Sao Paulo, we would get about 40,000 people to enter their license plate numbers. We got over 500,000 within the first couple of weeks to actually not just use the feature, but to go in and add their license plate number. So that told us that that was something very interesting, and we knew that we don't want to build features just for one country, but there were enough other people dealing with these issues that we could start rolling it out to Jakarta and other places. The second big piece is about adapting to change and how critical that's been for our group over 9 years, right? It's a really long time to be building one app. And we all know that focus is key. I believe strongly that we're successful because of all of the things we said no to building, that people wanted us to build. At the same time, you have to sometimes focus, and sometimes things are changing, so you have to learn what's happening in the market. You have to look outside, you have to look inside, you have to reevaluate. And then you have to be able to adapt in an appropriate way. And then you have to keep doing that over and 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 over again. And no one ever tells you when is the right time to do it, right? It's not when you get to 1 million users, it's time to reflect. I wish things were so clean, and I'm sure you guys wish they were too. Look, it's still going. So in about 2013, what I realized was we didn't just have an app, we had one of the largest databases of traffic that has ever existed. And we thought, what are we going to do with that? And so we decided to share this data, nothing personally identifiable, but with cities. And we started in Rio with the mayor actually had contacted us and said, the Pope is coming. We really want to know if we can use your data because we don't have anything else that's reliable in our traffic operations center. So I spent years working on that. We've now worked with over 700 cities and departments of transportation who rely on Waze data to reduce congestion, to improve emergency response times, and this was a completely other line than we had thought. And by now, we have the TV stations, we have the cities, we have the users, we have our incredible community, and you start to be able to put that together. You realize that it's not just a community we have, but it's a whole ecosystem. And this is how it plays out, for example, in Jakarta. So we had the TV station there, the largest one, sharing information about what was happening on the roads so that you didn't have to use Waze to figure out what was going on, and we like that. And this is what traffic looks like in Jakarta. It's awful. There are 2 million Wazers in Jakarta that are using this to try to navigate through the insanity that you see here. And because we had this data, they could start testing out their own city. All right, we know that the carpool policy that we have going now isn't working. They were putting dolls in the car, they were picking up strange children, they're doing all kinds of things. So they wanted to test this license plate routing thing that they learned about from Sao Paulo. Because they had the data before and after, they realized within 30 days that they had reduced congestion and travel times by 19%. So it was a very fast time to go from an experiment in a city with a whole policy to rolling on the long term. And then the question becomes, well, how do you make sure that this learning doesn't stay in Jakarta? How do you make sure that it's shared with Cluj and with everywhere else? So we started trying to bring these groups together. And this is, for example, the Indonesian community meetup. Because we still rely on 500,000 people around the world who help keep our maps fresh, every time there's a change in direction of a sign, every time there's a new road or a new mall created, there's local people all around the world who make sure that that data is fresh inside of Waze. And we get together in person. We've always been a company of algorithms and humans, and I think that that has allowed us to be able to keep a good pulse on how our product needed to change. And they're still getting together. It's because of this community that we were able to understand all the details about the new law, about how to do the license plate restrictions. We had people on the ground who knew exactly what days of the week, all of this, because it's very, very hard to get global information when you're one company sitting in Tel Aviv and Mountain View. Also, because of the Indonesian community, we offered scooter mode. You saw that there's probably 70% of the vehicles are scooters. Again, that's something that we tested out there, knowing that it would apply to almost every country in Latin America as well if we were able to pull it off, which we've done. So that's on congestion. A lot of our work with cities has been around trying to reduce traffic, but there have also been other surprises. So in the US, 70% of crashes everywhere are reported through Waze before calling 911, which are our emergency service. So cities that needed to rely on people picking up the telephone had no idea when there was a crash. So they believe, because of this information, that they have improved their response times by 4 minutes on average. And now the whole country is using this as a piece of infrastructure. So that's a little bit about scaling products, and we know how to do that. All of you know how to do it. It's hard. It's really hard, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't, but we know the tools. We know the process, right? What we don't always think about is the fact that whether we intend to or not, we're also shaping and influencing cultures with the companies we're building. And without naming names, I particularly think that Silicon Valley has done a great job in the last couple of years of shaping culture, or being responsible, or even understanding our culture, right? It's hard. What's the difference between inside of Google or inside of Facebook or inside of Airbnb or inside of Theranos? These are very subtle things, and there's no single framework for evaluating a culture or a culture's impact, and I think we need that now as companies. So 2.5 billion people are going to be coming into our cities in the next 20 years. It's going to be more pressure on our infrastructure, on our roads, on our homes than ever before, on our food. We have existential technologies that require a wise stewardship like never before. Artificial intelligence, while I'm completely excited about it, and I'm really working deeply in this right now, it's potentially terrifying. Who do you trust to take a technology like artificial intelligence and make the rules about what models are running where, or what it's going to do, or how it's going to work? Where's the transparency? And, robotics, same thing. Are we displacing our workers? There's all of these big questions that the technologies we're working with today, they're just so much more important than the technologies we were working on 10 and 20 years ago. And the dangerous technologies were not available to everybody else, right? Not everybody has access to a particle accelerator. So let me just give you one specific example about an entire ecosystem that's changing in the US, and this is about our supply chain. So the current way things are, or the old way, is big factories with products that are going to big warehouses, that are going into big trucks, that are going into big box retailers, and then are eventually making it to people's homes. That's fundamentally changing, right, with technology. We're going to be able to have smaller, lighter weight manufacturing plants. We might even have vehicles that do the manufacturing for us in the vehicle while it's on the way. All of this friction is going away. The issue with that is it could impact 32 million jobs. 21% of the entire workforce of the US works somewhere between trucking and retail. And it makes me really think about the fact that the problems that we want to solve now aren't going to be solved with specific products. They're going to be solved with systems. And it requires a new way of thinking. And a system can't be created by one company or one culture. It has to be something where people are saying, yes, I agree to give up control because collaborating on these conversations and collaborating on how we bring these tools to market is important. It requires you to sit back and think, okay, how do I want to use this technology, not just to make money, or not just to roll out our product, but to impact something that's a little more important. And I think that the money is really going to be flowing also not just to products, but to systems. And so if we reimagine that Blade Runner city and what technology could do, technology has this beautiful opportunity right now to influence our cities in a way that is going to allow each culture to be themselves and to flourish in their own way. Smaller footprints, potentially in our cities, smaller homes, more community spaces, more educational spaces, and it doesn't have to be the same everywhere. The other thing is that these technologies have to evolve hand in hand with our societies. And you can't just have tech companies or tech conferences that are the only people thinking about this. We have to make sure that we're getting outside of our small ways of thinking and make sure that we're really working with citizens and other kinds of groups and nonprofits and governments to figure out what's going to be best. And technology's promise is that it removes unwanted friction from our lives, right? But why? Is it so that we can get from point A to point B faster? Is it so that we can consume more? Or is it because we would like to improve quality of life? The problem with quality of life is there's no good way to measure it. This is a conversation I'm having across the industry right now. There's this funny thing called the happiness index, which means nothing. There's the GDP is something that we normally look at. There's unemployment rates. How do you really measure quality of life? And how do we agree on a metric so that we can start optimizing our systems and processes and products for it? And it's really going to be life in a self-aware world, right? And our roads are going to be smart, our plants and farms are going to be smart. Everything is going to be aware of itself and its role in the ecosystem. But also, wouldn't it be cool if we as humans were able to get a little more self-aware as well and pay a little bit more attention to what we're doing with all of this technology? Wait, stuck? I know. And this is not just kind of hippie, dreamy stuff. One of my favorite venture firms in Silicon Valley is Obvious Ventures from Ev Williams. And these are companies that they're funding for products that exist today. So electric and emission-free vehicles. This is Lilium, already exists. Flying cars, it's here. Very different impact on the environment. Diamonds that are being grown in labs, not mined. Again, products that already exist, companies that we're already funding. And food that provides health, not hurting our systems the way that the old ways of looking at food did. So again, this is not just vision, but I think that the money is starting to follow this, so it makes sense that we can all start to be happy that we have wise stewardship and money going into the same places. And it makes me think, if Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Larry Page, if they had 1/10 of their net worth, would we respect them less? Given everything that we've created, how much is too much? There has been a bit of an infection of greed in the startup ecosystem over the last years, and we have to get rid of it. We have to figure out how we're going to collaborate, and it's not going to be from the companies and countries that have the most to lose. Most of these changes, I don't believe, are going to come from the big countries or the big companies. Too much to lose. Who has the most to gain? Entrepreneurs, startups, smaller countries, other kinds of places. And so I think we need to start asking ourselves, how much is enough? How do we share not just our homes and our cars, but our equity structures as we think about partnering and collaborating on a massive scale? Oh, wait. I'm missing one slide, but you know what? I'll just tell you what it said. I think there's a certain kind of entrepreneur it's going to take to lead this movement and keep it going, and I call it a compassionate savage. Because if at the end of the day, you cannot rock star your growth and make amazing products and execute well, you're not really helping. But at the same time, you have to be compassionate in that. And so I call it a compassionate savage, and I hope that we'll all start thinking about building cultures worth scaling. Thank you.